We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On to banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. In the 1950s, George Reeves embodied the Man of Steel in Superman's first television adaptation, from its gritty black and white beginnings to the kid-friendly color years. To this day, an entire generation reveres George as their Superman, while for others, the show remains an overlooked chapter in the character's mythology. On this podcast, we bring everyone together as we break down each episode of Adventures of Superman. Welcome to another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Season 2, Episode 17, The Boy Who Hated Superman, is the host of Always Hold On to Smallville, returning guest, Zach Moore. Welcome back.
Hey, Anthony, I'm a boy who does not hate Superman.
I'm glad to hear that. This is the right place to be then. And are you a boy or are you a man? Because this is a question that I have as we're looking at this episode.
You know, I'm not going to say that this is Smallville level teenagers looking like adults, but I will say it's Chris O'Donnell Batman Forever territory. I'm like, you look like you're like 20. You don't look 25, but you don't look 15. People looked older back then. You know, you see pictures of people from in the 80s at prom, they look 45 years old. So maybe this is how a standard teenager looked. If we're to believe Jimmy Olsen is a teenager, because he's got to stay over at Clark's house when his mom's out of town. Maybe this kid is a teenager, Anthony.
Maybe. Well, this is a big picture question that I've had, and this is as good an episode as any to try to address it. How old do you think Jim Olsen is in this series?
Ooh, well, you know, it ran for 6 years. Those don't necessarily translate to a calendar year. So I'm not going to worry about that. But I mean, he can't be any younger than 17, right?
No. So his portrayer, Jack Larson, mid-20s, I believe, when they were filming this. But again, that doesn't mean that's how old the character is. As far as I know, at least in the episodes we've watched so far, I don't believe his age has ever been explicitly said. But at the same time, there's never any mention of him going to school. So I feel like he's at least 18.
That's a good point. He just works at the Daily Planet.
You know, there's never any mention of, he's coming from school, or got to get back to class, or this is a homework assignment. And maybe that's a misread on my part, but I feel like he's at least out of high school. Maybe not far out of high school, but I feel like he's at least 18.
Well, then he shouldn't be having to go stay with Clark Kent. It was out of town. Didn't this happen in season 1 as well? Or is this the first instance of that? I feel like there's Jimmy's mom called Clark.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. So that's when, I guess, if I'm remembering correctly, I feel like that established that he lived with her. I don't know if that had been addressed previously, but yes, it's the one where Jimmy doesn't come home and the mother calls up Clark. And of course, Clark is annoyed to get the call.
Like the couple of things before I get into it. Like you mentioned Jimmy Olsen. I gotta say, is Jack Larson my favorite Jimmy Olsen? He might be. I like Sam Huntington quite a bit from Superman Returns. I'd probably say he's my favorite. If you say, who's your favorite Jimmy Olsen? And then Michael Landis from Lois and Clark, because his interplay with Lane Smith as Harry, you know, that's a huge component there. But there's a reason why Jimmy Olsen maintained his status in the Superman family, and this show is a huge part of it because Jack Larson, even look, it's going to get sillier as we go, as I understand it. I'm most familiar with these black and white seasons. But I got to say, I'm really liking this version of Jimmy Olsen so far, Anthony.
Yes. No, I agree. I do think that this portrayal went such a long way towards cementing this character in the mythology, no doubt. And what he's been able to do, especially in these season 2 episodes, has been great. And just like the show overall, I think this version of Jimmy Olsen that we get in season 2 is kind of a great blend where he's not the butt of the joke or overly silly, but there are definitely a lot of opportunities for humor. And I think Larson does a great job with it. So I'm all for this incarnation of the character, especially in these black and white years. In my head, he's at least 18. Why he has to stay with Clark Kent when his mother's out of town, I don't get. But this begs a question, and I know I'm jumping ahead, but I'm going to play devil's advocate here and maybe come up with a little bit of headcanon. Do we think that Jim actually needed to stay with Clark because his mother was away, or was that just the cover story? Like Clark wanted Jim there to maybe try to rub off, be a good influence on this kid. And so he just said that Jim needed to stay there, but maybe that wasn't the case at all.
We can go with that. That seems like some kind of trick adults would play on troubled youths to get them to be around good influences. Yeah, well, we can go with that. Let's go with that. Let's say Jimmy's 19 or 20 and he lives with his mom because, hey, they're in Metropolis. It's expensive out there. We've all, post college or post high school or whatever, probably had to go live with our parents every now and then. Times are tough, right? Especially in the big, if that is the New York of this universe, you know how expensive it is to live in New York. So there you go.
It's true. I also like my headcanon that this was just a scenario that Clark came up with to sell Frankie on staying with him. Because the other thing I go back to, we know that Perry White has this suite at the newspaper club, at the press club. So if Jim really needed a place to stay where there's some form of supervision, I feel like that would be the place to stay. You can get a coffee and a sandwich at 2 a.m. So it's like, if you need to stay somewhere, that's the place.
Have we seen that since that one episode?
No.
Oh, man. Yeah. But hey, yeah, as I'm sure you're realizing as you rewatch the show, I love, even if it's these random one-off things like the press club, I love the mythology of these characters in their lives in this show. It's incredible. It's incredible. Like Clark's got all these friends and Perry's doing this and that. He's got these family members and who knows what Jimmy's got going on, but like Metropolis, man, like it's a character, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. It's one of my favorite aspects of this is kind of the unseen, unspoken lives that these characters lead. We see them for such specific, discrete units of time and very specific stories, but like they all have these other lives going on.
Yeah.
We're never privy to them, but we get little hints
Lois
here
went
and there.
out of town for some reason a couple episodes ago. It's just incredible stuff. Incredible. It's stuff you would never see in the modern shows because you just be so caught up in the story of the week or the villain or something like that. And I don't know. It's part of the charm of this show. And there will never be another Superman show like it. It just won't happen. I guess you could say that about all of them, but uniquely this one. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Like there wouldn't be another show built like this or built to tell these kinds of stories in this way. So let's give our overview of this episode and then we'll get into it more specifically. So the boy who hated Superman, the boy, we'll put that in quotes. I have more to say about the casting. We'll get to that. This aired on January 9th, 1954, written by David Chandler, directed by George Blair. And here is my synopsis. Clark takes in a boy named Frankie who idolizes his criminal uncle, the Duke, and hates Superman for apprehending him. A misguided Frankie agrees to stay with Clark in order to obtain the evidence Clark gathered that will be used at the Duke's trial. Frankie steals this evidence, but Superman intercepts it. Frankie also tries to corrupt Jim Olsen, a fellow resident at the Kent Home for Wayward Boys, but Jim only pretends to go along with these hoodlum ways. In the end, when Frankie learns that his uncle had sold him out, and the Daily Planet crew throws him a birthday party, he realizes his loyalty had been misplaced all along. He can't call off the Duke's prison break in time, but Clark manages to handle that as Superman and make it back in time for cake on a very special Adventures of Superman with a very strong moral message here.
This is the after school special of this series is what you're saying?
A little bit. So I guess we've already been getting into it a little bit, but overall impressions of this, what do you think about this one?
I enjoyed it. But I gotta say, is this not the least we've ever seen Superman in one of these episodes, Anthony?
It is exceedingly minimal Superman. I mean, if we're really tallying up screen time, I don't know. I look at even just the first episode of season 2, 5 Minutes to Doom. You only see Superman at the end for that race to the governor's mansion and then showing up at the prison. I mean, I don't know. You only get a couple of moments of Superman here when he goes to the fixer's place to take back the file of evidence, and then at the end when he pulls the fire truck over the car over the manhole cover. Yeah, I don't know. This was pretty scant Superman in this one.
And I guess the reason it feels like even less maybe than normal is his saves or activities are very minimal. Crashing through a window, which this Superman is prone to do, and then like pulling a car over a manhole. And that's like, he doesn't catch anybody falling. He doesn't fix a earthquake or stop a bullet or bang two guys' heads together. Really? I mean, he doesn't do any of that. He just
no, none of that. I think that's a good point. I think the thing that bugs me a little bit about this is it's the boy who hated Superman. The boy never interacts with Superman in this.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a great point.
He does, and he doesn't know it because he's staying at Clark's apartment.
Well, in a way, he did. Like,
yeah, wink.
Typical George Reeves.
But I do feel
Superman will be glad to hear that.
Yeah. But I feel like that's a little bit of a problem. I feel like, or at least a missed opportunity here, especially if you're going to call the episode that.
I didn't even think about that. Like and you know what? We'll get into it as we go through the episode, because there's a couple of instances now that you mentioned that where I'm like, oh, that would have been a good opportunity for that. But that probably is a strike against that. He needs to come to terms with Superman himself and not just like, whoa, my uncle actually was a bad guy, so I guess it's okay, Superman. Like, yeah, you need a conversation. I agree.
Also, not for anything, and maybe I'm nitpicking a little bit, but what we're here for. But the other thing too is, like, if anything, he has reason to hate Clark more than anyone. Clark's the one who dug up all this evidence. I mean, yes, Superman physically apprehended the uncle off screen, right? This all happened before the episode starts. But if anything, he should have a bigger axe to grind with Clark.
Yeah.
Not that he seems to be any big fan of Clark, but if you're really going to hate, and I mean like hate somebody, I feel like Clark would be the guy. So
the boy who hated Clark Kent. Not as compelling a title, I guess.
Yeah, fair enough. And then, yes, the casting here. So let me give my little guest star breakdown here. So we have Tyler McDuff as Frankie, who was 26 at the time of filming.
Okay, he looked younger than 26, to be fair.
All right. Yeah, I guess he does. But he doesn't look 15 or 16. I mean, I don't know exactly how old he's. I mean, Frankie celebrates a birthday. I don't know exactly which one, though.
It was his 30th birthday. He's in these nice suits, Anthony. He always makes him look older. It's like Clark in season 2 of Smallville, the first Red Krypton episode. They get him in this nice suit, and after that, they're like, "Ooh, Tom really, really looks every year of 26 when he's in this. We cannot dress him up. Get him a leather jacket or something after this. We can't have him in this nice suit." And that's, maybe that's what it is. It's aging him up, right?
Yes, but that's the thing. I feel like if you're not going to cast someone who looks like a kid, there needs to be something else in terms of the performance, the body language, the wardrobe that is selling him as a kid. And I agree, like, you put him in a suit, it makes him seem older. Now, I get what they're going for with this, the idea that he's really been seduced by the money, the lifestyle that his uncle's criminal ways provide. And even when he tries to, quote unquote, seduce Jim, it all has to do with the suit. It's like, I'm wearing a $200 suit and you shop in the basement. You're not going anywhere, kid. You got to fall in line with me. So, like, I know that's part of his whole thing, but it just made him look and feel so much older. And maybe I'm getting too tripped up on the title of this. Like, would I have felt better if it was the young man who hated Superman? I mean, maybe, but it just like feels like this should have been a younger person, a younger appearing person.
I was shocked because look, some part of the fun of these episodes is I've either seen them once a long time ago or maybe twice, or never seen them at all. So everything is like a brand new thing to me, other than key episodes like Panic in the Sky, right? Episodes like that, everybody knows. But it's like a brand new Superman adventure. So like when I see a title like that, I'm like, oh, it's gonna, because their kids have probably been part of the show before. It would be unheard of to have a child, like, I don't know, a 10-year-old, give or take, on the show. And when I see that title, I'm like, oh yeah, it's gonna be some 10-year-old kid. But it's not. I was a little shocked when it was Dick Grayson from Batman Forever in this age, in this role.
Yeah, no, for sure. So anyway, he was 26 at the time of this. He'll be back as Delivery Boy in Olsen's Millions, an episode in season 3. So we'll keep an eye out for Tyler McDuff. We have Leonard Penn as Fixer. He was in a season 1 episode, Treasure of the Incas. He was Pedro Mendoza. We also have Dick Reeves back as Babe, the Fixer's henchman accomplice. Now, Dick Reeves has come up before. We've talked previously about how he is not, in fact, related to George Reeves. You might think that he is, but he's not. But you and I also spoke about him a little while back. We discussed the on-aired 1961 Adventures of Superboy television pilot. And Dick Reeves was Shifty, one of the criminal trio in that episode.
Shifty.
So he's back again here. We also have Roy Barcroft as Duke, the Duke, and Charles Meredith as Judge Allen. I would say overall, other than kind of my nitpick about the boy looking and sounding and coming across as so old, I guess I also feel like, you know, this episode is in keeping, I think, with a lot of these season 2 installments where we have a new character who we're called upon to invest in, right? Whether it's Dabbs Greer in the season premiere or, Leave It to Beaver Dad in the second episode. We've seen this before, and I think this is in keeping with that. I guess it feels to me like they left something major on the table here where there could have been more to do with Jim and Jim maybe being a little bit seduced by the allure of these hoodlum ways or something like that. I feel like there was a way to maybe kind of raise the emotional stakes with our characters as opposed to kind of what was presented here, which was fine, but I don't know. I just felt like there was more that could have been done there.
I see your point. Although when these episodes are so short, do they have the time for Jimmy Olsen to go on some character arc? We'll get to it, but I knew instantly, I was like, all right, he's just going along with this for the act, right? There's no way Jimmy Olsen was this easily swayed. So if it started with Jimmy, maybe you have the whole 25 minutes to do it, maybe, but you got to start that at the very beginning to step through all the things. But that's what you mean. I mean, I guess, but that's just the way. I mean, this is basically an anthology show with the regular cast, right? There's not any sort of character change. So, but point taken. Like, it is an opportunity. If you really want to do your true after school special, you want to see the negative effects it can have even on one of your friends, right? And that would be Jimmy in this case. That's
the thing. And more, and this has come up in episodes, and I don't want to harp on this. We're talking about what the show is and is not built for. I really do have to just kind of accept that this was not made to really mine our regular characters' emotional lives, right? They're there and they're driving the action or they're along for the ride, whatever the case may be. But it's not designed for some of these kinds of stories that I might be advocating for. But sometimes I guess it feels a little frustrating because it just feels like, we were so close to something. Or even, I guess what this also kind of called to mind was towards the end of season 1 of Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. Remember there was the young homeless boy, Jack, who Clark took in?
Yes.
Right. And again, wrong side of the tracks and mixed up with the law and kind of needed to be set straight, needed a good positive influence. And Clark was able to provide that. I mean, unfortunately, the show just dropped him into season 2, but it was a cool dynamic for the couple of episodes while it lasted. And I felt like you could, again, but that show was built in a different way, but you could kind of invest a little bit more in that character and that relationship.
You mentioned Jack from Lois and Clark, not to go too far afield here, but like, that's the kind of age range Jimmy Olsen is supposed to be according to what everybody tells us, right? Like 14-ish, right? I mean, like a high school intern. Like, how old is Mark McClure in the Superman movies? Like, I don't know. He's certainly by Superman 4, he looks about 40. But they never. So, like, I think Superman the Animated Series are the youngest looking Jimmy Olsen, and because that's an animation, you can get away with that. Like, I don't know how old this kid is. But when you're casting actors and stuff, it's I mean, there's obviously, you know, all the shows work with kids. They have hour limits and all that. So anyway, I see what you're saying there too. Like if they there are no even recurring guests other than like Professor Pepperwinkle, right?
Right.
He's like the one recurring guest star. Yeah, we could have used I could have used a Boy Who Hated Superman for a few episodes. It would at least populate the Daily Planet, right? As we've seen like 3 other employees ever so far.
I know. And this is not the first time where we've had a character introduction. I mean, to be perfectly honest, am I clamoring for more Frankie in particular? Maybe not. But a while back, we did the Jet Ace episode and we had Chris White. And it's like, my God, like this character is such a badass. This is a great introduction. He could help Superman. It could be a whole thing. Hey, you never see him again. So, it's fine. And I recognize too, we're looking at this through a modern lens and more serialized storytelling on shows where characters do come back and they have arcs. And I know that's not what this was, but I just can't help but kind of long for that when we have an opportunity like this. But in any event, any other big picture observations before we segue into our scene by scene discussion here?
Just the intro, as I've been watching through season 2, the intros are incredibly inconsistent. It's interesting that like sometimes it's just the season 1 intro, copy and paste with another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, which is great because that's the title of your podcast. So it's great when that pops up. Then it's the season 1 intro without that. That's the only change. And then sometimes it's what I'm calling the season 2 intro. And you can tell because it's a different George Reeves and the compositing is better, where he's not like half fade into the space, he's him and the American flag and Clark Kent. And he's got a very different expression. And actually, I kind of like the season 1 intro expression because he looks kind of triumphant. And season 2 intro, he looks kind of mad. He's like judging you. He looks kind of pissed off. I don't know. Just next time you watch it, keep that in mind. Anyway, it's just interesting how inconsistent it is. And I can only assume that's because these episodes are all reassembled for home video purposes. Is that right, Anthony?
That's my understanding. I think we can chalk it up to that. If this were ever to get a properly restored, reassembled re-release where you have the true students and historians of the show who could tell you what's supposed to go where, because we've talked too about different versions of episodes floating around out there. I think that's kind of all a product of that. But yeah, I've been noticing that too. And exactly the things that you've mentioned, certainly that little line at the end, but yes, the shot of George. I know it is very inconsistent on the DVDs at least.
Well, and I figured, because I was on earlier in the season, I figured, okay, but it's the transition between 1 and 2. They'll figure it out. We're on episode 17 season 2, and it's still going back and forth. It's just interesting. So I wanted to point that out.
Yeah, and I would say to our audience, especially for anyone who's watching digitally, like if you bought them on what used to be known as Vudu, and the Fandango at home, is that the new thing? Whatever it is. If you bought them there or on Amazon, let us know what it's like there, because it might be different. We're working off of the DVDs. All right, so our scene-by-scene discussion of The Boy Who Hated Superman. So we start in Judge Allen's chambers. He's the judge of the juvenile court talking to Frankie. So this is where we meet Frankie, and the judge is explaining that he's a minor. He has to have a guardian appointed to him, someone to take him in while his uncle, the Duke, is awaiting trial. And this is where I think you get a really good encapsulation of Frankie's state of mind, his worldview. He talks about how he lived with his dad. They had nothing. His dad played it straight by the book. They had nothing. Then his dad died. His uncle took him in. They had everything. So, you kind of get a sense of certainly, again, where his loyalties lie and kind of where he's leaning. And he says, we had everything. And the judge says, everything except love.
Yeah. That's right, kids.
Yeah.
That's your after school special. I did like how, they're trying to point out to this kid. He's like, yeah, me and the Duke, we're going to go to South America. And they're like, yeah, like stolen money. Don't you get it? Like the kid still doesn't get that they're criminals and that's wrong what they've been doing.
Yeah, I know. This was something that I'm trying to figure out here because, well, we'll continue on with the scene because I do have a question with exactly what Frankie thinks here. So the judge says that he has an idea and he calls in Clark Kent. And that's when Kent offers to let Frankie stay with him. And that's when he talks about how Jim Olsen is also staying with me because his mother's out of town. And again, Frankie's going on, but he hates Superman. Superman apprehended his uncle. But there's also this bit here about Clark framing his uncle. So I guess that's the thing. What exactly does Frankie think his uncle is on the up and up? But then at the same time, he talked about how with his father he had nothing, who kind of played it straight. So what is it?
Yeah, and then he interacts with these shady worlds with the fixers and all this kind of stuff, right? So it's like, the criminal. He's just saying that in front of a judge, I guess, and Clark Kent. I to save face because he knows they're criminals. He knows they're criminals. He's not naive. He's naive in that he believes everything his uncle tells him. He's naive in that way, but he's not naive to them being criminals.
Yes. Yeah. No, that that makes sense. So essentially, I mean, tells Clark to pound sand more or less. But then we have.
Well, would you change your mind? Here's my address.
Yeah. It's also, I mean, and the judge was just like, okay, think about it. I mean, I feel like the judge would have been like,
where does he go? You're either going back to your jail cell or you're going with this guy.
I guess. I mean, Frankie does insist on visiting his uncle. He's like, it's my right. I want to visit my uncle. So the judge allows that. I mean, presumably after that, the judge would have made him go somewhere. I mean, I don't know, unless this judge is very lax. But then we have this visitation scene between the Duke and Frankie. Essentially, Frankie saying, like, I'm not going to go with him. And then the uncle has this idea of like, no, stay at Kent's place because you can try to dig up the evidence that he gathered that's going to be used against me. Mm-hmm. I don't want to nitpick here, but was this evidence not turned over to the police ever? Like, what is going on here?
Maybe he has his own notes, his own personal notes that he would probably keep at his office at the Daily Planet, but still. You keep your friends close and your enemies closer, Anthony. That's what's going on here.
Yeah, fair enough. And to Frankie and the Duke's credit, not only does Frankie stay at the apartment, but he does also pretend that he's interested in learning how to be a reporter.
Yeah.
Which gets him in at the Daily Planet.
Yeah, he doesn't come in with like this attitude. He comes in with like, hey, yeah, man, I'm glad you know what, you guys are right. Like he's playing it off pretty well. And people who want to see good in people like Clark and Jimmy, they're going to believe that. But one last point on this interrogation room scene. They've upgraded the interrogation room sets from the beginning of the season because I'm sure it's the same set because it's this show. But it was 5 Minutes to Doom, and when Clark does the lie detector on the guy's wrist, I'm like, no, we got a barrier now. You can't be doing that, which is probably how I think prisons are.
Yeah, you can't hold hands,
right?
For a long story. I know.
Yeah, you got to do your hands up against the glass thing. Everybody knows that. But anyway. Upgraded the visitation room at the prison.
Very true. But so anyway, uncle and nephew hatch this plan here. And then we're at Clark's apartment where, well, no, I think my headcanon has to go out the window here because Jim is there. Even though, as far as they know, Frankie is not coming. So
I don't know. I think Clark was hopeful. I think Clark was waiting there hoping he would show up because he's really kind of, lost in thought, right? Waiting for hopefully that kid to walk through the door, right?
All right, fair enough. I know he's lost in thought, so much so that Jim is like, don't you like the dinner I made? And I was saying to myself, Clark, he makes his Jim stay over. He puts him to work right away. Like,
that's so in line with this Clark. I love this Clark Kent so much. This George Reeves might be becoming my favorite Clark Kent, I swear.
I know. Because you could expect him. Be like, what's for dinner, Jim?
Yeah. Oh, sure. Golly, Mr. Kent. Let me go see what's in the pantry. No, just puts him to work. I'm going to be working late. I'll get back later.
Yeah. It's funny. So there's the talk here about Jim making dinner for them. And then in an upcoming scene, when the three of them are there together, Clark remarks about like, oh, this is a pretty good bachelor dinner. And then Jim is like, yeah, last night we had pork and beans. Tonight, beans and pork. Do you watch It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia by any chance?
Occasionally.
There's so many episodes.
Yeah. That's the thing. I've seen a handful, but not near enough to probably know your reference, but please do share.
Great episode where Mac and Dennis go out and live in the suburbs, and Mac is the kind of the stay-at-home one, and Dennis goes back to the bar to work during the day, and he comes back. And so Mac makes Mac's famous mac and cheese for dinner, like their first night in the suburbs, and Dennis loves it. He's like, this is great. And like night after night, Mac just keeps making Mac's famous mac and cheese. And it's kind of losing its luster a little bit, and then the tensions throughout the rest of the episode are continuing to mount until eventually Dennis explodes. And later we open a cabinet and it's just boxes of the Kraft mac and cheese. That's the famous mac and cheese. But that's what good. I thought of with all this talk of pork and beans that they're having every night.
Yeah. And they had a good laugh about it. Like, oh, beans and pork and beans. Ah. Hilarious.
So yeah, Clark, he's distracted. He's thinking about Frankie, and then Frankie shows up. And like you said, he's really sells it. He's like, he's on board. He's here. He wants to learn how to be a reporter. And I know, to your point, I mean, Jim, I think, is naive enough. He would just be like, oh, this is great. And Clark, not naive, but hopeful. So he doesn't second guess like what a swift turnaround this kid has had. Well, I guess we'll go with it.
He chooses to see the good in people.
Yes. So then we cut over to Fixer and Babe in their place. And we have the start here of a very funny runner about Babe not getting the game of chess.
Yeah.
Which is great. Also, I got his name from IMDb. I don't know if he's ever addressed as Babe in the episode.
I don't remember his name. I remember Fixer because a lot of people are saying Fixer. And I thought, is he a fixer or is Fixer his name? But I don't know. And then I don't remember them saying the other guy's name at all.
Yeah. So I'm going with the IMDb there. But yeah, I love this funny bit about him not getting the game of chess because the next time we cut over to them, it kicks off again with this confusion over the game, which little things like that I love because they could have easily not had that. It really doesn't add anything to the episode, but just this like little bit of color into their dynamic and this game that the one guy doesn't understand. So I like that. Mm-hmm. But Frankie shows up and has this whole request/plan where, you know, he's going to try to get this evidence from Clark's place. But if he can't, he wants to hire Fixer to break the Duke out of jail. And it's quite a high cost to pull off something like this. $5,000 down and another $5,000 upon completion. Frankie doesn't have all of it, but he promises that he'll get it.
Do you think my read on this was it was going to be just $5,000 even, but then Frankie had the 5,000. He's like, well, that's just the down payment, right? I mean, that's the vibe I got from it.
Yeah, same. It was too fat. Like he gave the money over too quickly. It was, he didn't balk at the price. He wasn't like, oh, I got to try to get it together. Handed the whole thing over right away. Yeah, I think, I think if there had been a little hemming and hawing, I don't think it would have jumped to 10,000. Yeah, well, he's still got a lot to learn about these hoodlum ways. He's still early.
He's
days.
just a kid.
He's
just a kid who hates Superman.
He's just a little boy, Zach. He's just a little boy. He doesn't know. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of two of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show, too. So now we're in the Daily Planet, and Frankie's there, and Clark's showing him around the very plain office, right? There's not a lot to it. And it's not fancy. And Clark even has a line about, most people think reporters are just like Supermen, but that's not the case. And if this is a career that you think you're interested in, be prepared to spend a lot of hours in a space like this. And then Lois comes in needing a voucher for $1,000 because the Daily Planet is participating in some charity. They're buying televisions and donating them, something to that effect.
Always some kind of charity going on with these guys, thousands of dollars. Clark's like, yeah, we have thousands of dollars in cash all the time. We never know when we're going to need it. We might have to send a reporter to Timbuktu. I'm like, man, the 50s was a different era of journalism, let me tell you.
Very much so. But I really liked getting that little bit of insight into the mechanics of their financials, right?
That's the world building I was talking about earlier. People always say, you know what I'd like to see, just a show or a story just about Clark Kent, not even no Superman at all. I'm like, that's almost what this show is. They're talking about signing vouchers for charity to buy TVs, and Clark's explaining all the economics of the Daily Planet. this is as close as you're ever going to get, and I am here for it. You don't get this kind of stuff in any other Superman interpretation. Let me tell you.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was a cool little detail, and it tracks. We observe this all the time of how they're able to jump on a plane on a dime, right, and make all this stuff. It always happens very quickly, and it's like, well, they've got this vast stash on hand, and mostly, as is addressed here, they rely on the honor system, right? And Clark's the one who authorizes all of this. He's got quite the position of power there.
I got to. So this sets up a couple things. This scene, well, first, Clark, he mentioned Superman, and Frankie's like, I don't want to hear the word Superman ever again. Oh, sorry, okay, right. And then they pull out this money thing, and you're like, oh, he's gonna steal this money. And they, correct me if I'm wrong, we'll get there, but this never pays off.
Literally,
right?
No, you're right. He, just to kind of follow this thread for a second, after Clark leaves the office, because Clark's going to go inquire about a job for Frankie. Frankie he wants to work at the Daily Planet. And Jim is busy working on the typewriter, working on a story. So Frankie sits down at the desk and he pulls out one of those voucher slips, because now he's seen the process. Clark signs one of these voucher slips, and then the office downstairs gives him a wad of cash. Yeah. So he takes that. And then later in the episode, we'll see him forging Clark's signature on it. And then
he's trying to copy it. Yeah. And
then we see him practicing. That gave me shades of White Collar, the Matt Bomer USA series. I don't know if you ever watched that, but fascinating about how they fake all this stuff. But then he goes to the Daily Planet, and that's when later on he overhears Jim and Clark talking about how Jim hasn't really fallen in line. He's just pretending. But I think he was going there to try to get the money, but he just gets annoyed and leaves instead. So no, that never pays off.
It's interesting. It's not a plot hole, so to speak. It's just a plan that didn't come through at the end, which is fine. It's just interesting that oh, well, isn't this convenient? He's going to at that point, I knew how the episode was going to go, right? So, well, he's going to forge Clark's. What do you mean? I didn't sign for this. And the whole thing. And they never go there. And they kind of zigged when you thought they were going to zag. And that's actually kind of refreshing, I guess.
Yeah, that swerve was cool. No, I agree. Also, I have to give them credit here, because in this scene, I'm glad you brought this up. The fact that he is still holding on to his hate, even though he's pretending he's cool with Clark and he's interested in being a reporter and he wants a job. He doesn't go so far as to be oh yeah, Superman, he's pretty cool. I'm over it now. He publicly, right, hangs on to that bit of hatred. So
he is the boy who hates Superman.
Yeah, he lives up to the title. So at least with respect to the hate, if not the boy part.
Yeah.
but yeah, I like that. The fact that it wasn't such an about face. He still had that wrinkle there that it's okay, maybe it's easier to buy that they would fall for this act, maybe.
Yeah.
So then we're back in Clark's apartment at night for that bachelor dinner we were talking about before. They really putting Jim to work, cooking all these meals for them. And the second Clark is done eating, he's I got to go. He's I got to go back to the office. Now,
here we go.
Going back to the private lives of these characters, I know people watch it, you probably would assume, okay, maybe he literally is going back to work on a story, or most people probably think, he's going to change to Superman and patrol the city. I don't think so. I feel
you don't think Superman goes on patrol. He goes out to the nightclubs and
I think he's going to the Tip Top Club. I think he's got something else going on. I mean, what do you think?
I did think that he was just going to go be Superman, because it's you go back to the office. He's sometimes. I mean,
I know.
So I don't know. This. That's the thing though. With this show, with this Clark Kent, you never know. All possibilities are equal. He could go be flying around on patrol Superman. He could be going back to the Daily Planet to go work on some stuff, or he could just be out on the town talking to all his friends and contacts. All are equally valid.
And we say this somewhat facetious, he's going to the Tip Top Club, but that's the thing. He could be, and you don't know. And he could be going back to Smallville. Ma's still alive, as far as we know. So it could be something like that. Always using Lois and Clark as kind of our counterpoint, but it's a natural one, because this is Adventures of Superman. That's the new Adventures of Superman. And there you saw a lot of Clark, again, visiting with Ma and Pa on the farm, playing basketball, just playing a pickup game of hoops on the weekend. So you got to see what he did when he wasn't being the reporter or being Superman. You don't get that here. So anything is possible.
Yeah. And this this is a pre-crisis Clark Kent, right? But the interesting thing is all the guys that were writing Clark Kent post-crisis were influenced by this show. So when they made Clark Kent the real person, it actually fit pretty well because he was already a real person going out, having friends, doing things. It's interesting. There's not this like straight line of like crisis and post-crisis, and it was always like this, and now it's always like that. There's a lot of blurred lines here, and that's interesting for people like us who are watching all these things and comparing them all and talking about them. It's just something that's a cool nuance to the character.
Yeah, like this is a really fundamental and fascinating piece of that puzzle.
It's incredible that we're having this whole tangent about like, because Clark Kent left dinner and said he's going back to work. Oh man. No, for real though, this Clark Kent, I gotta say, he might be becoming my favorite one. That's no joke.
Yeah, no, I no, absolutely. And again, speaking of, post-crisis, it's like, that's one of the things, maybe the thing that's been the most eye-opening about really exploring this series. And kind of with the knowledge now, especially speaking with the man who ran those comics for all those years, that this was such a direct inspiration because, yeah, it's like you can see that spiritual connection between the Reeves, Clark, and what we got post-crisis. It's amazing. But Clark's out the door. And so now we just have the two boys here. And this is where, again, as soon as Clark leaves, he's like, oh, that's a real square for you, right? He's square. Frankie doesn't mean any offense, but Clark's a real square. And this is where he tries to kind of lure Jim over. All these remarks about, a lot of it seems to kind of boil down to, Jim having a shop in the basement at a store, whereas Frankie is there in his $200 suits and he wants to kind of bring Jim in line and work for the Duke and all that. And Jim seems to kind of go along. Like, what was your take on this back and forth between the two of them?
I didn't know what to expect because you don't know what a show like this is going to do. Right. I mean, we were talking earlier and I was like, I bet he's faking it the whole time. I was hoping because like if they did where like he got seduced by this in 2 minutes, even Jimmy Olsen's like, oh, yeah, you can change your whole outlook on things in a couple of minutes. I was like, please let that not be the case. So they could have gone either way because Jimmy did a great job. Jimmy did a great job of fooling him, fooling the audience. I'm glad it didn't. I think they could have done what you were talking about earlier with him actually like being influenced by this guy and having me pull out of it. But I mean, we're like halfway through the episode now. So I think that's too late to have a start, middle, and end to that kind of story arc. But hey, good for Jimmy. He fooled Frankie. So
he did. I mean, and no, I agree. Going back to what I was saying before, if this had been more about the battle for the soul of Jim Olsen, it would have needed to start with him a lot earlier. This point in the episode would not be the time to try to show that. Again, I think there's some version where you could have done something. Maybe if he had a pre-existing relationship with Frankie, that might have, as opposed to he's just kind of dropped into their lives out of nowhere.
He's been in juvie since I knew you in elementary school kind of situation. Yeah, that's an angle.
I got to say though, this scene between the two of them had probably the funniest bit to me of the whole episode, where Frankie's like, it's my birthday tomorrow. And Jim's like, oh, we'll throw you a party. And he's like, that's not what I meant. That's not why I brought that up.
That was a funny moment.
He's just Jim is so
the
sweet.
Swing of back and forth to that, right?
Yeah, like Jim is just so sweet and innocent. And it's like, oh, it's your birthday? Like, we'll make you a party. He's like, that's not why I said that. I thought that was great. So that genuinely made me laugh. So now we have this whole overnight sequence here where Clark's still out and Jim and Frankie are asleep in Clark's living room.
The club's closed around 2, so Clark probably got home around 2:30 a.m.
Yeah, the timing tracks. Frankie, of course, is not actually asleep. He gets up, he goes through Clark's desk. He finds a folder, he lights a match so he can read it and sees that it's evidence in the Duke case. And he calls Fixer and tells him, I got it. Drive by, send somebody. I'll throw it out the window. Flash the light so I know. I'll throw it out the window. So he takes the file, gets back into bed, pretends to go to sleep. And that's when Clark comes back. And Clark, despite a night of partying, is still sharp as ever because he notices that match, that discarded match. Yeah. Which arouses his suspicion. And he goes into the bedroom and then uses X-ray vision and observes Frankie through the wall in the living room, getting up and tossing the file outside the window. And then, of course, we get a change to Superman, and he flies over to Fixers. And
it's probably the daytime in that stock footage, but that's fine. I'm not going to harp on that.
I know.
I've seen quite a few through season 2. I've been seeing quite a few. Clark leaves his office without a hat, and then is in the hallway with a hat to go into the storeroom. Why wouldn't he just? Well, I guess that's a little obvious if Superman is flying out of the window of Clark Kent's office, so that's fine. I'm not going to say why didn't he just jump out of his own window, but no, that's makes sense. He would go into the storeroom, and then what does he do? Let's explore this for a second. I know this is not exactly the situation, but like he goes into the storeroom. Does he come out of the storeroom as Superman? Does he fly? Is there a hole in the roof? Is it a Superman Return situation where he just clearly just goes through the top of the elevator shaft? Like, what does he do when he comes out of the storeroom?
That's a good. Well, he does come back out of when he returns. I think he goes back the way he came because the Shot in the Dark episode we did, he bumps into Perry as he's coming out of the storage room.
That's right.
He's like, I ran out of paper. Yeah.
That's the most Christopher Reeve-esque Clark Kent I've ever seen George Reeves.
Yeah.
Is that I'm glad we talked about that particular one. You're right, because then he jumps out of we see him as Superman jumping out of a window, presumably the Daily Planet hallway. That's crazy. He just goes into a room as Clark comes out as Superman. Well, you know why it works? Because no one is around at the Daily Planet. There's no one that works here on this floor. So there's no security cameras in the 50s. Fair enough. Got it. No more complaints from me. But yes, he turns into Superman in his bedroom and jumps out the window and goes to, I presumably follow the car that took the files that Frankie threw out the window.
Exactly. And this was so cool because he goes into Fixer's place and they throw the file onto the fire and he uses super breath.
Yeah, first of all, he crashes through the window, which is a pretty impressive like destruction of the wall. I guess they figured, you know what, we got no other Superman stuff going on. We're just gonna have him just smash this wall because he'll like slip in through a window or something. But this was like, a lot of these Adventures of Superman episodes, I think a lot of people when they think about it, think of him running through like a brick wall or a cave. That's like his go-to with rocks flying everywhere, right? And that's this episode's answer to that. Like, here's all the bricks and stuff that are falling down. So like, give a little extra here because since there's literally almost no more Superman after this.
Very true. Did you get the sense that there's a decent amount of backstory between Superman and Fixer? Like they've had dealings.
And he's like, oh, what are you up to, Fixer? Like, I like that. Again, the mythology of the show, these shady crime guys, Superman knows what they're up to. He's always stopping them with their little games. And then Fixer's like, well, it's classic Lex Luthor. He's like, well, there's no evidence to tie me to this. I just picked up a folder off the street. There's no crime in that. I was like, he's right.
He's right. And then he even gets a dig in as Superman's going to leave. He's like, all right, try to use the door this time.
Yeah.
Which is great. No, like, that's the thing where, look, like by design with these podcasts, we're overanalyzing a lot of these things.
Everything.
And clearly, I really doubt that there was much thought put into this exchange in terms of, backstory and past dealings. I don't know if the writers were necessarily considering that, but in this back and forth and the way the characters regard each other, clearly there's something between them. And it's like, to us, at least, it's fascinating.
Yeah. And you're right. We started talking about something else, but they in order to, destroy the evidence before Superman can get back from, they throw it into the fire and he uses his super breath. And that's a power you don't see very often, at least on this show, right?
No. And it really stands out because we've had earlier instances this season with fire where that would have really come in handy. I mean, the Jet Ace episode, that cabin's burning to the ground. It's like, blow it out.
Yeah.
So
I kind of like, last time was when we talked about heat vision. So let's talk about freeze breath for a second. This is a good opportunity, right? We're just any Superman thing we can pull on in this Superman Bear episode. Let's do it, right? I like super breath as like the wind. When it comes to freezing, I don't know. Like I'm not strongly against it, but I don't know like the correlation of like, oh, you can. So we were talking about heat vision. All these other powers are just like extenuated human abilities, but then it's like you can shoot fire from your eyes and breathe ice. So people call it ice breath, super breath. It's a kind of interchangeable. Sometimes he's freezing lakes and things. And other times he's just blowing out gas and fires. So I don't know. Like it's one of those, that's a power that's very nebulous, right? The breath powers of Superman.
I know. That's a good question. I don't know where I land on that because I do kind of like that idea of, like we talked about and you just brought up, the powers just being extensions of natural abilities that people possess. So the super breath being more like wind, tracks. But then when you add this freezing component, now we're into different territory. But then when you look at instances like in, the Christopher Reeve Superman movie, or Superman and Lois, where he's freezing the body of water and then carrying it to put out a fire, or in Lois and Clark, when he freezes Lois to make it appear that she's dead to go along with the demands of the villains of that episode.
It's a helpful power.
Like, we've had some really cool uses of it, so I it would be tough to discard it, but yeah, I don't know. It is a little tricky. I mean, when Mike Carlin was on, speaking of that Jet Ace episode, I mean, he talked about how, in his own estimation, it's kind of like the silliest power. It doesn't always look great on screen. It's tough to visualize even on paper. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, even Smallville, which mastered almost all of the powers. I think we both admit that, like, it always looked kind of silly when Clark's like, it's like, okay. And they kind of shied away from that after they first, much like Super Hearing, they were like, I don't know about these two, y'all. We don't know how to visualize them. But I think Smallville, I will fight everyone and say that Smallville has the best version of all these powers, except for probably Super Hearing and Freeze Breath. Super Hearing, they didn't even know, right? They were cycling through all these different versions, and the breath powers, like, I don't even remember him using Super Breath on Smallville that much. Like, it was very helpful that one episode where he needed to put out those fires around Lex and Lana, but, like, can't think of like a big save in a Smallville episode outside of that one where he uses the Super Breath, Anthony.
I know. And with the exception of Flight, which we didn't get until the very end, they really dragged their feet with the Super Breath. I mean, that wasn't until season 6. So much time had passed. It seemed like we were done with the new powers.
With the powers, yeah.
Because it was like a one a year deal, and then a long drought, and then they're like, oh yeah, Super Breath. So,
I guess we'll do the Super Breath. I told you, I thought we were going to do that. One looks dumb. I know, but we're out of powers. What are we going to do?
I think it's very telling. I know a tangent, but famously, right, the producers of that show originally had a 5-year plan. I think it's very telling they did this in season 6 because
everything post season 5, was never part of their plan. Anyway, oh man, again, I love how we can just he used Super Breath in this episode. Boom, 10-minute tangent about Super Breath. I love it. I'm here for it.
That's the fun of all of this. Now we're back in the Daily Planet, and we get a Perry appearance. He'll also pop up again at the birthday party later. But
who would want this Perry White at their birthday party, by the way?
I know, it's just a ball of fun. Although we'll get to it, but he has probably my second favorite line of the entire thing. And also, too, you know what? I like this little scene here because Perry's concerned about Jim. He says he's acting like a kid again, and he thinks Frankie's a bad influence, and he should go back to the juvenile authorities. And the reason why I like this is we talk a lot about how this Perry is just so gruff. And sometimes, to me, it can feel a bit one note. We don't get more of that paternal side that I do like to see, at least here and there. But you see this here, like he's genuinely concerned about Jim. He doesn't talk to Jim, but at least he talks to Clark about it. So I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he's more one-dimensional than first impressions might lead you to believe.
Yeah. And then we go to Lois's office and we see Jim doing his hoodlum act. What's your take on just how Jim is going along with this, right? And we, the audience at this point, we don't know. Like, he's had this discussion with Frankie. Now we see him here acting belligerent. Like, it seems like maybe he has kind of lost his way a little bit.
Yeah, because I was like, is it? Again, I suspected this was an act. But then I'm like, I don't know. Is this how a 1950s TV show would portray a rebellious youth? I don't know. It might be. So that's the one thing that kept me guessing. Oh, what do you do? Nothing. I worked hard enough today. I'm just going to hang out now. I'm going to cut out early. I'm like, okay. I don't know. I could see a Lever to Beaver episode where one of Beaver's friends is a jerk and acts that way. So I don't know.
Yeah. But as belligerent as he is, and again, it's really nothing that extreme. It's mostly just he's a lot of mean mugging it. He's just looking angry and he doesn't want to work. Yet he wants to take them out to a very expensive lunch. Right?
That's right.
Because Clark comes in and, proposes to Lois. They go to Tony's diner like they normally do. And Jim's like, no, like, I want to take you out someplace nice. And he goes, I don't know what to make of this line. He goes, Frankie showed me how last night. Now, I guess my question, what did Frankie show him about? I mean, because did Frank and Jim go out after they had that conversation before they went to sleep?
I didn't think about that. Maybe because, Clark was out till 2:30 as we established. So maybe he took him out, right?
Yeah, or Frankie just, I don't know, gave him a wad of cash, and I mean, I don't know exactly what Frankie is meant to have shown him, but that's what Jim wants to do.
Well, they mentioned Tony's Diner. That talk about continuity. That's Tony from My Friend Superman.
Yeah, I know. I like that. I know for a show that's, as we were just saying, is very light on that. It's like, okay, right on. You get little
they must have
glimpses of
filmed
it.
these the same day, Anthony. That's probably why it was on their mind. As the production of these shows tended to do, you know.
I know.
But that was actually, I thought to myself, wait a minute, that's the name of the guy. If I wasn't watching these kind of the way I was, I wouldn't have clocked it. But since I am, it's like, that's the guy just from a couple episodes ago. Look at you, Avengers of Superman.
I know. Here and there, you get little bits like that. And we appreciate that connective tissue. So back at Clark's apartment, Frankie gets a call from Fixer, and this is where he learns that Superman intercepted that evidence. So they're moving forward now with this prison break here, which was the backup plan that they had agreed upon. Frankie still doesn't have the money, but he is insistent that he will get that money. And that's where he pulls out that voucher slip that he had stolen from Clark's desk and starts to practice the Clark Kent
Practice his signature.
Because he's got his press badge, right, to use as an example. Now at the Daily Planet, we get, I mean, just like classic George Reeves annoyed Clark, where Jim, again, still acting belligerent, wants to knock off early. He's done enough work. And Clark is like, what is going on with you? And
you get back here. You sit down. You listen to me.
Which, you know what, again, I think is so much in line with this version of Clark that we love so much. But also, sometimes that's what you need. Right?
Yeah.
Like you call someone out, you're direct, you're like, what is going on? You know, sometimes for all of us, right? In whatever situation, whatever it might be, you know, you dance around, you're not sure, you don't want to overstep, you don't want to.
What's on your mind, Jim? Yeah, no, that's not the time for that.
No, I mean, sometimes you need to just be like, all right, what is it? And that's what he does here. And that's when Jim finally admits that this was all just an act. And I do like that Clark's like, well, why didn't you tell us?
Yeah. He's like, well, I don't know. Fair enough. He's a kid.
Just
a kid. He's not thinking straight.
Boy. He's just a little boy, just like Frankie. And speaking of Frankie, this is where Frankie shows up, right? We were talking about this before. He's there. Presumably he's going to try to steal the money, but he doesn't get a chance because he overhears this and he gets annoyed and he goes outside and Jim follows him. So now they're outside the Daily Planet and Frankie feels betrayed by Jim, that Jim was just pretending to go along with all of this. And that's when Babe shows up to take Frankie to Fixer. And
okay. Hold on. So this is the guy who was with Fixer, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think they do say his name in the episode. I do think they call him Babe because I was watching the end. I'm like, is this a guy from another gang? Because they were talking about gangs and all this and that. So honestly, there's so many gangsters on these shows who pop up everywhere. I honestly didn't know if this was the same guy or just a third party who had entered the scene. So yes, got it. Thank you. Now I understand.
That's why I don't mean to belabor this point either, but when we talk about, kind of missed opportunities, no Lex Luthor, we always talk about this on the show and it feels like, wow, he would fit perfectly in this world here. And it's like, it would just, although, I mean, this time period, it would have been more the mad scientist Lex, but still like to have one figure, even if it only pops up a couple of times a season or something, but just to kind of like tie all of these gangsters together. I don't know.
Like the Ultra Humanite, Anthony.
Yeah.
So have you read the first year of Action Comics?
Not in full, but just kind of here and there. Yeah. I
have that, number 1, volume 1, Superman volume 1. And it's like, I have that and I have Batman, like volume 1, because I felt like, oh, these are like the real year ones. None of this, this is like literally 1938, 1939 for those two guys. And I swear, man, like, it's almost like a TV show in a way, like at the end, like the last issue was like Ultra Humanite. And then not the 8 Ultra Humanite that we know, the bald Ultra Humanite that somebody got confused with Lex Luthor about later on. And that's why Lex is bald. It's amazing. But at the end, he's like, yes, I'm the one who did this and that and this. And it kind of ties stuff together. I'm like, look at that. Like, you could have totally done that on Adventures of Superman. And that totally would have worked. And in this era of the character, maybe Ultra Humanite instead of Lex Luthor. I don't know. But you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I feel like it would have just been cool to just kind of have something tying all of this together. But it's fine. We just take it more, like you said, like an anthology series, just kind of episode by episode. And in the fleeting instances where you get Tony's Diner referenced or Pepperwinkle comes back, we go with it.
Yeah.
So Jim insists on sticking with him and they drive around the corner.
Yeah, Frankie tells him to beat it. So he doesn't want him to see him get mixed up in this. That shows your little little goodness in his heart, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we'll go with that. That is something. And yeah, again, Jim, of course, we know his heroic character, and he wants to stick this out and see it through. And they drive around the corner, and then we get this kind of probably like major revelation that really turns a lot around for Frankie. Where, and there also seems to be this business where, at first my read was that Babe was there to collect the money that Frankie owed Fixer, but then there was this talk about the Duke owed Babe money, right?
Yeah, see, that's why I was confused. Like, is this a third party? But no, it is the henchman of the Fixer, because they mentioned like that business a few weeks ago with the other gang, and they owed us one, and they sold you out. And I don't know, I got kind of lost. Not gonna lie, I didn't know who this guy was. I didn't know what they were talking about. But long story short, turns out the Duke, was gonna give up Frankie in order to get out of trouble. And hey, that's not true. The Duke got us plane tickets to South America or whatever. And then Babe is like, look in your pocket there, son. You got those tickets? How many tickets is that? Just one. That's right. I'm like, okay. I don't know. Lots of exposition was dumped in this back alley, Anthony.
Yeah. So the plane ticket bit, I like that. And yeah, I mean, I'm almost positive this guy is the same guy who was with Fixer, unless
no, absolutely, absolutely. You're right. Now that we know it is, they totally say his name, Babe. So that was on screen after all. So that I know that now.
But in also not only with the plane ticket, but there's also this business about the Duke selling Frankie out to the Red River Gang, or just the River Gang, where there was some conflict over territory, and whatever the case was, Frankie was kind of the sacrificial lamb. I guess he had gotten beaten up or something like that, and that the Duke had sold him out. This info dump, you know what this reminded me of?
What?
Remember Spider-Man 3? You know where I'm going with this.
Your father died by his own glider. I cleaned his wound.
So, we have like almost 2 full movies of Harry Osborn blaming Spider-Man, who he then comes to learn is Peter Parker, for the death of his father, Norman. And this hatred takes him down such a dark path. And then, towards the climax of the final movie in this trilogy, out of nowhere, all of a sudden the butler's like, oh, by the way.
Frankie did look kind of like James Franco, actually. Not to mention it.
Yes.
You know what's so funny about the Spider-Man 3 thing, where he's like, your father was stabbed by his own glider. And I always thought to myself, how do you know Spider-Man then just pick that glider up and stab him? And then, Anthony, Spider-Man No Way Home. What is Spider-Man about to do to the Green Goblin? He's about to pick up his glider and kill him with it.
That's true.
So even that reveal of the truth, that could have gone either way. But no, totally. This kid has gone down a dark path, and all this new information has totally turned him around 180. So yes, good comparison. Good call.
That's what I thought of. And again, I know we have limited real estate here. I guess it would have been cool if he could have learned this lesson, I don't know, in a more organic way, as opposed to just kind of this info dump, but it's fine.
You talk about the boy who hated Superman having no scenes with Superman. Frankie has no scenes with the Duke after this. Like, it should have been like he went to go help the Duke escape, and then the Duke gives him up, right? And then somehow he knows some information that can catch the Duke, and because of that, it's like, Frankie, you're okay after all. You made the right decision, son, or something like that. Now, we're not here to rewrite a 70-year-old TV show, but there's story beats here that are, like you were saying earlier about the whole maybe Jimmy going down a dark path, turn around. There's potential, and it's just like, it's like they got to wrap this thing up. Is where we are, story wise. It seems, right?
Yeah, and to be fair, and we've said this before, but when we offer these hypothetical rewrites, it's never. And go back and check the tapes. Like my critiques are never, oh man, you can see the tear on George's costume. That's ridiculous. Or, oh, why isn't he fighting Brainiac in this episode? It's never that. I mean, we're talking about, again, I think pretty fundamental, like you said, story beats where able to be achieved, within the 1950s paradigm. So again, I don't think it's like so out of bounds. And so we have this, exchange with Babe, and then Jim offers money to Babe.
He's like, sure, kid, I don't care where I get the money from.
Yeah, exactly. And then Jim stomps his foot, and Frankie clocks him, and they get in the car. And I love the two of them working together like that. That was great.
Yeah, that was good.
And finally, we return to Clark's apartment. And, from the moment he walks in, it seems like, Frankie's this information he's learned has registered and has started to shift his opinion. And that continues when he sees the Daily Planet crew, Clark and Lois and Perry, throwing him a birthday party. Clark comes out with this giant cake. And Frankie's like, I never had a party before. I guess I've never really had anything before. And it really
I like
seems,
that.
Yeah, like it's really
that's a good moment. Yeah. I mean, because calling back to what the judge said, you never had love. If you don't have love, you got nothing.
Yeah. I'll be perfectly honest, because again, it's been a while since I watched these. I don't remember all of the beats. I thought that was it. I was like, oh, all right. Like,
well, I was looking at the timer. I'm like, this is it, right? because he's not. That's the thing. He's not going to break the Duke out. He's not going to have the evidence. I guess everything's been resolved. But then it keeps going. But this cake you mentioned, we missed a beat, Anthony. We should have counted the candles. We would have known how old Frankie was, and we just counted the candles.
I know. There are quite a lot of candles. I love how Perry is helping to set the table. I don't buy that this Perry sets tables.
He would have had Jimmy do it. But Jimmy wasn't there.
Jimmy wasn't there. I know.
He's extra mad because he had to do it. Where's Jimmy?
And so again, I've never really had anything before. And then Frankie excuses himself to go 2 feet away to make this call to the fixer, to try to call off this prison break, but can't be called off. It's already in motion.
It's too late.
Duke's on his way out. He's gonna be coming up through this manhole cover. And of course, Clark is here. We get X-ray vision, super hearing, and super breath all in one episode.
And flight.
And of course, yeah.
We can flight.
And super strength, smashing through the wall and pulling the car.
What a display of powers. Amazing.
Yeah. If only he had melted something with that X-ray vision, and that's it, because he didn't have super speed. So that would have been everything.
No, this Superman does not have super speed, clearly. The super hearing on this show, I like how subtle it is. We're just like, oh yeah, he can just hear stuff other people can't. We don't need a big zoom in on his ear. Because because you would expect that, right? Because the way they do X-ray vision, it's always the stock footage of real extreme close up of George Reeves, like nose and eyes, and then transparency of what he's seeing, which is fine. Not criticizing. I'm just saying, like, that's how they do X-ray vision. You would assume with super hearing they'd have a big close up of his ear, and then a transparency of the people talking. But you just understand. Like in a couple episodes ago in that Friend of Superman episode, like there's all this music going on and he's just using his super hearing to hear through the music, and you understand what's going on. So it's like they're giving the audience some credit there in the 50s.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's like a little bit goes a long way. You could fill in the blank yourself. I like that. So of course, Clark does overhear that, and they turn out the lights to sing Happy Birthday. And while they're singing, Clark backs away into his room, changes to Superman, goes to this spot where the Duke is going to be coming up from that manhole cover. And like we said at the beginning, pulls the car. I think he steps on the cover first, right? And then he pulls the car.
Yeah, I love that. He's like, how am I going to, no, I can't stay in here. Let me pull this car. Like, and it's such a subtle thing. But for this show, I'm like, hey, he just effortlessly pulls this car over the manhole and leaves. And I'm like, it's this kind of mischievous Superman that this guy is. I'm sure you got a good laugh out of like how he's going to push that thing up. Like, he's not going to stay and arrest him. He's just going to make it so he can't get out of the manhole and goes back to his life. I love that.
I know. It was such an interesting choice, because that's the thing. He could have let the Duke come up first and then grabbed him, or pulled him up and karate chopped him, or brought him to the police. He could have done anything, but it's like, no, like, I'm just going to cut off his escape route and he'll just be stuck. He'll go back, whatever. I love it. And he gets back in time for the end of the Happy Birthday song. More or less.
Right
Where's
here, Chief, as he's coming in. For all the criticism we have of the stock footage of him, like, just like running away, and it's footage from a lot of it's from Superman and the Mole Men, right? I mean, that's where a lot of it is. So, and I wonder what they do in the color season. I don't recall. Like, do they colorize that footage? I'm interested to see what they do. But they do a lot of like tie and collar play and like adjusting glasses. Like, there's a lot of that. Like, I didn't expect that from the show. I just expected him to just be there. But they do a lot of like, he unbuttons a couple of buttons or vice versa, and he adjusts his glasses. Like, there's just a little bit goes a long way, as always with this show. Just a little bit of transition, right? And that's really all I'm looking for, and they're really delivering on that. You know what I'm saying?
I know. I was thinking, because I know we were talking not too long ago about the shirt rip, and you don't go that far, but yeah, just like the glasses and the the tie, it gives you a little bit of that.
It's like the Snyder movies. You don't get the shirt rip until the end, but you get like the slight adjustment of the tie when before he goes off to say the Dios de los Muertos people are there. So yeah, it's it is something. It's a little touch that they didn't have to do, but I like that they did it.
Yeah, I agree. I appreciate that. And this leads to, again, this very funny Perry remark where they ask Frankie what he wished for, and it's like it does sound very odd. Or he's like, something that was going to happen, I wish it didn't happen. Perry's like, well, that's a strange one. I love that. And and again, Clark's back in time for cake, and Frankie says he doesn't hate Superman anymore.
Well, Superman will be very happy to hear that, Frankie.
And we're out. Yeah. And that's the episode. I had a lot of fun talking about it. My mileage out of the episode itself, I think, was limited. I mean, it makes sense given this time frame when we're talking about, Senate hearings and Wortham's seduction of the innocent book and, the changes that we're seeing on the comic book front to really kind of sanitize them, avoid these charges that comic books contribute to juvenile delinquency. And again, we see that, manifesting on season 2 of this show, that we really do have more of these moral messages, and obviously the violence has been toned down and all of that. Yeah. So like the idea that they would do an episode about a youth who has been led astray and his loyalty is misplaced and he hates Superman, and then he realizes what really matters, and he sees the difference between someone who is just using him versus someone who actually cares and is invested in him. I get it, and it's a nice story. Again, I think it just kind of missed the mark for me in a few respects, like we've talked about.
Yeah, it's always this like, well, like, is it, do you see missed potential? And you're like, oh, maybe they could have done this versus what they actually did. But I talking through with you, I enjoyed it well enough, but talking through it here, I do see more of the weaknesses.
I'm sorry.
Of the episode. Way to go. You've made me like it less. Thanks, Anthony. That's why I come here.
I think about that a lot, though, and especially with our audience members. And I know we have people listening to this who grew up in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, watching this either the first time around or in reruns, and watching it as a kid and falling in love with these episodes. And, this might be I'm sure this is someone's favorite episode. Like, any critique is never meant to take away from anyone's enjoyment of it. But at the same time, you and I talk about this as both of us doing, rewatch podcasts. It's like, if I was just coming on here every episode saying, oh, like, I love it, it's so great, I genuinely think the episodes would be boring and I would be bored doing it, and I wouldn't do it. So, we take them as they come, and we call them as we see them.
We do.
Well, on that note, out of 5 fedoras, how many would you give The Boy Who Hated Superman?
I didn't dislike it as much as you, I think. We're about to find out. But I probably, before we started hashing it all out and breaking it all down, I probably would have given it like 3 fedoras. I'm going to go down to like 2.5 fedoras. Just right down the middle. It's not the worst episode of the show. It's not the best episode of the show. This is a solid entry. 26 episode seasons. You get nothing wrong with a few of these in there. And its heart was in the right place too. So just 2.5 out of 5 fedoras for me.
That is, and I even printed it out, so I have proof. That's exactly where I landed as well. So okay. 2.5. So we were in alignment on that. 2.5. Yeah, right down the middle for this one. But no, I agree. I agree with your assessment. Well, like I said,
I was worried you were going to give it less. I thought you're going to be like 2 or 1.5 or something.
No, like that's
The Boy Who Hated Superman. More like the guy who hated this episode. Am I right?
No, that's the thing. It wasn't like, I don't look at this and say, oh, what a disaster of an episode. It's just, there were a few things that I think had they been adjusted, I would have really liked it. That's all. But still definitely a perfectly watchable, enjoyable episode, and a lot of fun to talk about. I always appreciate you coming on, taking the time to rewatch and have these discussions. And, we mentioned, of course, and folks hear the ad for Always Hold On to Smallville. But what would you like to share with folks about your podcasting efforts?
Well, Always Hold On to Smallville. We talk about each and every episode of that young Superman show that ran from 2001 to 2011 on the WB and the CW. And we are in season 10, my friends. We are in the stretch run, the last season of Smallville, episode by episode coverage. The podcast will continue past season 10, but it's a huge milestone to have literally gone through every single episode in depth as we do. I was doing the math, and these episodes that you do here for Adventures of Superman, probably about 3 times as long as the episodes themselves, which is about the ratio of how long my Smallville episodes are at this point. If a Smallville episode is 40 minutes, I mean, the average always on the Smallville episode is probably about an hour and a half. So, you know, maybe even longer. So when you go through these episodes like we do, it takes a while, but it's fun. It's fun. Like we go on these tangents. You never know where the conversation is going to take you. It's fun to just have a passionate conversation with fellow fans like we do here. And that's what we try to do over there too. Have some humor, have some knowledge, have a good time. And that's what we're all about over there too. And if you like Adventures of Superman, I'm sure there's 218 episodes of Smallville. I'm sure there's a few in there you would like as well. So check us out on social media at Always Smallville with 1 S.
Awesome. I hope everyone will do that. Zach, thank you again. As always, this is always such a blast. Audience, I appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you come back next week for another all new episode. And until then, remember, only Superman can do super things. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey, a weekly exploration of Superman's vast 85-year mythology, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.